Through technology, we can communicate in a way that many of our ancestors could only dream of. There is a spiritual hunger and yearning for something deeper amongst people today, on top of which many have been given a glimpse of their own mortality because of COVID-19. It seems to me that this is a Kairos moment. And to take advantage of this, if I can use that phrase, I want to argue that there is a need for the church to refocus its attention and its resources, which have been primarily concentrated on how to enable worship as a gathered community. For the sake of the kingdom and the calling we each have as Christians, I believe we need to strategize, invest, innovate, and experiment as how we might grow disciples as a scattered community. Early on in lockdown, my attention was grabbed by a parable I encountered from Alan Hirsch, who is an author and missional church innovator some of you may have encountered. Hirsch talks about how chess masters who want to progress their game had to learn to play and win without their queen, which is seen as being one of the most flexible pieces on the chessboard. They had to learn what all the other pieces could do in order to win a game. Once they'd done this, once they'd learned how to become a champion without over-relying on a single piece, they were ready to advance. And Hirsch went on to suggest that for the church, many of the elements that have made up our Sunday gathered services have in effect been our queen. What we've done is we've over-relied on them. But now, because of the pandemic, our queen has been taken out and we are being forced to relearn what all the other elements of the church can do. Now, I don't know if that's a helpful parable for you, but for me, it has transformed so much of my thinking about church, in particular Sunday gatherings. I've grown a little tired of hearing announcements of churches reopening for Sunday services. As I want to say, the church has never closed. We just haven't been able to fully use our buildings. There have been other elements of church which have been successfully continuing and bearing fruit despite all the restrictions of COVID-19. So a question I've been reflecting on is this: how do we encourage and invest in growing Christ-like disciples who make disciples in the 6 days and 23 hours of the rest of our week, rather than focus all our energy and attention into a 60-minute time slot, desperately trying to replicate online everything we used to do offline? If I might be deliberately provocative, it feels at times that we have jumped over Jesus and gone straight to Paul. Jesus didn't say go and plant churches, but he did say go and make disciples. Yet it seems that we have an obsession with planting, establishing and maintaining churches to the extent that some of the other things that we are called to do, which I'm sure many of you are faithfully doing and seeing week in and week out, are not being viewed as significant as perhaps they should be. It's as if we're encouraging models that have definitive metrics, such as bottoms on seats for our morning service, or perhaps in our current context, it's views on YouTube. These are measurable results. It is instantly apparent how well we're doing. Whereas disciple making is far more nebulous. Things like conversations, availability, listening, being present, witnessing gradual change, they're not as easy to measure. Perhaps the blame could be levied at our approach to sharing the good news of Jesus. I wonder if we've been teaching people to share their faith rather than sharing their lives. Theologian and author Scot McKnight, writing in the excellent book, The King Jesus Gospel, he puts it this way: we have created a community of consumers who are brand loyal, but fail to understand the nature of allegiance when it comes to what Jesus asked us to do. Are we encouraging people to just watch the show, or are we equipping them to scatter? In our focus on worshipping as a gathered community, is it possible that we have taught people to be Bible literate, but not gospel fluent? Perhaps one of the key lessons we are learning from the pandemic is that whilst our gathered model is disrupted, it needn't stop the growing of disciples. And we cannot afford, in all senses of that phrase, to continue with a model of church which is so reliant on just a few people for just a short period of time, when you consider all of the opportunities around us in the average week. We need to look at an approach that works across the entire week and involves the entire congregation, as God is interested in every moment of our lives, not just the hour of power on a Sunday led by the so-called professionals. So in our webinar today, we're going to try to explore what it means to create a disciple-making culture in our communities across the whole of the week. It is not the final word on the topic, and we are not the experts. In actual fact, quite the opposite. But what we do have is a burden to remind ourselves and perhaps one another what a disciple-making process looks like. What about this mandate that Jesus gave his followers to make disciples who make disciples as they are going about their everyday, ordinary lives? And here's the thing. A disciple-making strategy can be outworked with just a few people and hardly any resources. In fact, when I first wrote about this way back in Christmas last year, as we were preparing for regional conferences, I wrote this down. Creating a disciple-making culture with 6 people is easier than with 600 people. It's almost as if God knew what was going to happen. I earnestly believe if we, as followers of Jesus today, shift our focus from reinterpreting and replicating what we used to do in the church, trying to put online all we once did offline, and instead focused on how we might create a disciple-making culture in the rural communities where we live and work, I think that we would end up with results which would be transformative, headline-grabbing, and history-making. A good place for us to begin thinking about being a disciple and the disciple-making strategy is by looking at the word disciple. Sorry, I'll just move that slide on. Let me go back to that one. You see, I wonder if we are operating with a mistaken definition of discipleship. I'm going to make a huge generalization here. So here goes. I think we have confused the place of evangelism and discipleship. We see evangelism as telling people about Jesus and helping them perhaps pray a prayer, and then see discipleship as the work of growing and nurturing that faith. It's like evangelism gets them in the door, and then the work of discipleship begins to mature that faith. So let's step back and reflect on the word disciple for a moment to see if it might help our understanding. The Oxford English Dictionary defines disciple as one of Christ's personal followers, i.e. one of the 12 apostles, or a follower or adherent or any leader of thought, art, conduct. Now, I'm not sure how illuminating that is. So what I'd like us to do is we're going to try and put you in some breakout groups, and Nick will hopefully do that automatically. And I'd like you to focus on this question, and I'm going to try and put this in the chat as well for you all to have a look at. The question is this: when you hear the word disciple, what images and words come to mind? What does it mean for you? So I'll put that in the chat. If I paste that, hopefully this will work. So hopefully you will see that. And then we're going to put you into breakout groups, which should now happen automatically. So Nick, can I ask you to put people into their breakout groups, please?